When I was 28, I needed a serious break. I was a city boy, living off coffee and anxiety, and my doctor finally told me to unplug for a month. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no deadlines. Just silence. I found the perfect spot on a private rental site, an isolated, rustic cabin in the deep woods of northern Maine. The listing was called The Hermit's Respite. It had no reviews, which was a red flag. But the photos, dark wood, a stone fireplace, and a deck overlooking a hidden lake, were exactly what I needed. The price was suspiciously low, too. The host was listed simply as the keeper. I paid the fee and downloaded the only thing he sent: a set of cryptic, hand-drawn directions, complete with latitude and longitude coordinates. I drove for 2 days, ending up on a gravel logging road that hadn't seen a truck in years. I checked the coordinates on my GPS, but they put me about a quarter mile off the main path. I found the cabin exactly where the map said it would be. It was even more isolated than the pictures suggested. It sat by a perfectly still black lake, surrounded by pines so thick they blocked the afternoon sun. The air was cold, damp, and perfectly silent. The key was in the mailbox, just as the keeper had promised. The first week was perfect. I read books, built fires, and felt the tightness in my chest finally start to ease. The only oddity was the house itself. It was built without any standard electrical wiring. The only lights were kerosene lamps, and the only heat came from the stone hearth. It felt ancient, disconnected. Then I started noticing the objects. Every room in the house had small, seemingly random objects placed in the corners or on mantels. An old, tarnished brass bell that didn't ring. A smooth black stone the size of my fist. And in the kitchen, a wooden bowl filled with dozens of tiny, dried-up black. I tried to move them once, but the moment I touched the bowl, I felt a sharp, cold sting run up my arm, and I dropped it. I left the bowl right where it was. The silence, which I had initially loved, started to turn oppressive. It wasn't just a lack of sound, it was an absence of it. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling the pines. It was too quiet. One evening, about 10 days into my stay, I was looking at the old hand-drawn map. I realized the cabin itself wasn't labeled. Only the lake, marked simply as the water. I decided to compare the map to my GPS one last time before the battery died. I typed in the latitude and longitude, which I had written down in my notebook. The GPS displayed a message I still can't explain: location unverified, access denied. I tried again. Same result. The satellite system. I typed in the latitude and longitude, which I had written down in my notebook. The GPS displayed a message. I tried again. Same result. The satellite system, which knew my location relative to the coordinates, refused to acknowledge that a structure existed there. I drove a pin onto the map at the exact spot. The program crashed. I spent the rest of the night flipping through the photos I had taken on my phone. They looked perfectly normal. The stone fireplace, the lake, the pines. Then I noticed the metadata. Every single photo I had taken inside the cabin had the GPS data stripped out. It just showed coordinates unknown, but photos I had taken of the car or the road leading in were fine. The cabin was actively deleting its own existence from the digital world, and I was inside it. The fear that took root was not of a bear or a madman. It was the fear of being in a place that the world had formally rejected. The next few days were characterized by intense paranoia. I stopped sleeping. I started doing rounds, checking the 2 windows and the front door every hour. The cabin's quietness had a new quality: expectation. One morning, I was sitting by the fire, examining the small, tarnished brass bell. It had an inscription etched into it, nearly worn away, keeper of the deepest quiet. As I ran my finger over the letters, I heard a sound from outside, a sound that broke the silence like glass shattering. It was a faint, dry, repetitive scratching sound. It wasn't coming from the front or the back. It was coming from under the floorboards, right beneath my feet. I shot up and backed away, shining my dying flashlight on the rough-hewn wooden floor. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, like long fingernails raking across dry wood. I stood there for 5 minutes, frozen. Then it stopped, and the oppressive silence rushed back in. I looked back at the table. The small objects had moved. The brass bell was now lying on its side. The black stone, which had been smooth, now had a single faint white line scored across its surface. And the bowl of black berries, the shriveled eyes, had been moved a foot to the left, and there was one more berry in the bowl than before. I was certain of it. I realized that the objects in the cabin weren't just props. They were the archivists. They were watching my reaction, cataloging my fear, and marking their progress. The scratching continued, sporadically, over the next 48 hours. Always from beneath the floor, always stopping the moment I moved. I started moving my furniture, searching for a hatch or a loose floorboard. I found nothing. The floor was solid, seamless, and cold. 2 days later, I was huddled in the corner, trying to save my phone battery. I had given up on finding an exit and was simply waiting for the scratching to start again. When I looked up, the air in the room was visibly colder. A patch of condensation had formed on the inside of the only window in the room. In the frost, a word had been drawn, clearly and meticulously, as if etched with a needle. R-O-N-N-I-E. It was my name. I hadn't told the keeper my real name, only the email address I used for the site. Yet there it was, breathing on the glass. I backed away until my head hit the stone wall. I heard the lock on the front door click, clearly and audibly, as the bolt slid home. I hadn't locked it since the second day. I was trapped in a place that the world had forgotten, with something that could write my name and lock the door from the inside. I didn't try the door. I knew it was useless. I grabbed the one thing I still had, a small axe I'd brought for firewood. I went back to the corner of the room where the scratching had been the loudest and started swinging. Loud, dull thudding of an axe hitting wood, interspersed with panicked shouts. The wood was harder than iron. After 5 minutes of frantic chopping, I hadn't even splintered the surface. I dropped the axe, exhausted, my mind racing. I looked at the objects again. The bowl of black berries, the brass bell, The black stone with the white line. They were the key. They had to be. I remembered the cold sting when I touched the berries. I picked up the black stone, the one that had been scratched. It was ice cold. I smashed it on the floor, hoping to break the spell. The stone didn't shatter. The faint white line across it deepened, but the stone remained intact. And the scratching started immediately, violently, all over the room, as if dozens of things were scrambling under the floorboards at once. I ran to the window. The condensation with my name was still there. I looked out at the lake. It was no longer still. There were slow, heavy ripples moving across its surface, moving outward from the shore toward the center, as if something massive had just surfaced beneath the water. And then I saw the figure. It was standing at the edge of the woods where I had left my car. It was impossibly tall, thin, and black, a figure defined by the sheer lack of light it reflected. It wasn't moving, but it was facing the cabin. I realized what the whole thing was. The cabin wasn't a low price. The unlisted coordinates, the stripped metadata. It was all designed to isolate the victim and their memory. The last piece of my sanity snapped when the figure started moving toward the cabin. It wasn't walking. It was gliding, silent and unnaturally fast. I heard the last sound, not a roar, not a scream, but a perfect, overwhelming shh sound that seemed to come from the core of the earth, silencing the scratching, the wind, and even the pounding of my heart. The front door bolt slid back with a slow, grinding scrape. I grabbed my phone for one last act of desperation. I forced the camera on and pointed it at the figure now filling the doorway. I hit the record button. I found myself outside. My car was still parked on the logging road. I was soaked, bleeding from my hands, and holding the axe. I remember nothing of the journey out. My phone was dead. When I finally charged it, I found the final frame was corrupted into a terrifying static image. But the metadata was the crucial piece. The video was time-stamped 2 months after I had left the cabin. When I checked the rental site, the hermit's respite was gone. The host, the keeper, had never existed. But I know the truth. I was kept there. I was consumed, and the only thing that escaped was the raw fear recorded on my phone. I checked my phone last week. The black stone, the brass bell, and the bowl of blackberries are all gone from the photos I took. The cabin erased itself from the record completely. However, when I look closely at the corrupted final frame of the video, I can see a new, clear message hidden in the static. Next reservation, Ronnie. I still live in the city, but I haven't slept properly since. I hear the scratching under the floorboards of my apartment now. I know the objects are here, cataloging the archive of my silence.